All right. Good morning, everyone. Pleasure to see you all. It is another one of our wonderful weekly press conference briefings on where we've been and where we're headed. It's pretty hard to believe that we're already in March, and the way we know it is the intensity of our committees. And so I'm so thrilled to be again joined by the chair of our Finance Committee, Senator Melanie Griffith, and the chair of our Education, Energy, and the Environment Committee, Senator Brian Feldman. These have been the two workhorse committees this week, each of them almost going after 9 almost every night. Hundreds of witnesses each day. I think it was 156 witnesses one day. There was another 124. And so committees are hard at work. And so I'm so grateful for our leadership team and the chairs of these two committees. I also want to thank the staff members of the legislature in the committees and for members. These have been long days. Lots of folks have families, and it can be really difficult, but this really truly is service. And I want to make sure that staff understand how much we appreciate the work that they do. And our wonderful fourth branch of government that also is staying up late and watching all of these committee hearings and reporting to help Marylanders know what their legislature is doing on their behalf. So it has certainly been an intense time. We had a very great week with working with the administration on a number of fronts. And I'm really pleased for the first time in 8 years to have had the governor of our state come to our Senate committee hearings and present an idea, a thought, a plan with legislation, and sit there and answer questions and really justify the bill. And in some cases, places where there's very genuine questions of not even disagreement, but just want to understand why and how. And the governor participated actively, and that's something that we really appreciate. That is the way that we effectively operate here in the state of Maryland, is by having tough conversations and figuring out how to compromise to make sure that we get the best product on behalf of all Marylanders. Do want to make a special note of the passage of an important bill this past week, which was the Clean Trucks Act of 2023. This will put Maryland on the forefront of trying to address climate change in a very thoughtful and purposeful way. These are very hard conversations. I've said it up here a number of times, how we address climate change and how the costs are borne, who bears those costs. These are difficult conversations, and I'm really proud of the work that the Senate did and the Education, Energy, and Environment Committee to move forward a bill that is thoughtful, brought everybody around the table, and I think is going to be a model for the entire country. So there's a number of pieces of legislation that are coming next week. Like we will see a number of the reproductive protection bills. We'll probably see a number of gun-related bills, firearm safety acts to try to protect Marylanders from the scourge of gun violence. And we're also going to have a very robust conversation about public safety. And I think that this is going to be one that is absolutely important. We've said it time and time again. If people don't feel safe, nothing else matters. And that means safety in lots of different ways. It's not just the headline news issues. It's how people genuinely feel. Do they have opportunity? Do they have a real path forward? So 2 more weeks until crossover, which is March 20th. We're going to be in full swing. It's going to be a very, very intense 2 weeks, and we'll start to see what will and won't move forward over these next 2 weeks. And with that, it'll be our committee chairs who are helping to lead the way. I will hand it over to Chair of our Finance Committee, Senator Melanie Griffith.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's good to be back with you all. I think the last time we were together, we talked about the behavioral health package that the chamber is taking up. I will report that the telehealth bill, the preserved telehealth bill, that was an important part of that behavioral health package, is moving. We're really pleased because it means increased access to health care for people all across the state, whether you're in an urban area or a rural area where you might not have access to as much access to health care as you need. And this is an important tool for our behavioral health providers to meet the needs of their communities. You all probably also know that, as the president stated, we have had hundreds of witnesses. I think by the end of the week, we might have had 600 witnesses come through Senate Finance on a couple of really important bills that the committee is taking up. We heard yesterday a presentation from the governor on his Minimum Wage Act bill, and there was, as the president stated, very thoughtful questions from the committee We will begin having conversations as a committee on the bills that we heard this week, probably some starting today and then some early next week. We had 2 hearings on reproductive health bills this week. We expect to have conversations about the constitutional amendment and take that up in committee. We look forward to a vote on that bill. We believe the support is there from the members. This is an important piece of legislation for the state in light of what's happening across the country. We also had a bill that will protect our healthcare providers and those who receive this legally provided healthcare to make sure that their privacy is protected. So the committee will be taking up those bills as presented and look forward to voting and hopefully moving those to the chamber next week. We heard a bill yesterday on the paid family leave. This is a bill to work out some of the glitches, if you will, that might have been present in the bill as we passed it last year, to fine-tune that legislation so that we make sure that we take care of our families that are in need of time off of their job to take care of themselves or a loved one. So we'll be working on that bill in the committee probably next week. And then, you know, we're also mindful of the new budget process. So some of the bills that we consider do have fiscal implications. So we'll be working in partnership with our colleagues on the Budget and Tax Committee to make sure that we're thoughtful about impact in the out years in the budget. And so I'll pause there and turn it over to the chair of the EEE committee.
Well, great to be here with my friends. Let me just rehash, starting with Senate President Fergen's comments. I think the Clean Trucks Act was a significant piece of legislation. Glad we got that done. You know, we've had a lot of bills dealing with this electrifying, this energy transition to electrifying all aspects of our society. And the transportation sector is actually by far the #1 contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. So getting a handle, this deals with medium and heavy trucks. We're going to be probably moving as a state towards the California emission standards when it comes to passenger and light vehicles. And so that, I think, is a significant piece of legislation. It was backed up just and by the way, that bill passed third reader just yesterday. Earlier in the week, we then had the Lieutenant Governor, my former district mate from District 15, the Lieutenant Governor presented a companion bill, Senate Bill 548, entitled Clean Transportation Energy Act, puts funding behind Senator Augustine's bill on medium and heavy trucks, puts money towards electric vehicle charging station infrastructure, a huge problem. We have some bills dealing with building out our electric vehicle infrastructure in this state, which we are lagging behind. There's a lot we can do. We have some bills that I think could push forward. There's money in the governor's bill, Senate Bill 548 in that space. Another theme that I think continues to emerge as we make a lot of investments in clean energy is that you have to make sure that these investments also make their way to folks in low and moderate income situations. We have a bill on the floor today in that regard dealing with the Empower program, which has been a hugely successful program for our state in terms of energy savings. But what we have found, those dollars and those which everybody in the state of Maryland contributes to that Empower program have not made their way down to folks living in low and moderate income houses. And so there's a bill today that sets for the first time in our state targets to make that happen. And I think that's actually a significant theme that you'll see emerging in the clean energy space broadly. Last night we did pass a bill dealing with reproductive health care services. And that's going to be a bill, Senate Bill 341, one of the package of bills that we rolled out in the Senate, 4 bills. This has to do with our higher education institutions. 4-year institutions are going to have to come up with a plan by August 1st of 2024 to a full range of reproductive health care services, referral networks, and the like. This is a big issue on college campuses. I mean, some of the statistics, 38% of college dropouts are a result of pregnancy, and that 61% of women who have babies during the time they're in college drop out before they even get their college degrees. So this is, I think, an important piece of legislation. We passed it out of the EEE committee last night. I assume we'll see it on the floor sometime next week or so. Looking ahead to next week, the issue of offshore wind. If you look at the Inflation Reduction Act, we will have a hearing on Tuesday. There is a tremendous amount of investment tax credit money, federal dollars to incentivize the development of offshore wind. And I think we made a commitment way back in 2013 to go this route. In 2019, in the Clean Energy Jobs Act, we went up a little further. And with the federal dollars flowing, investment tax credit for the development of offshore wind, I think this piece of legislation ties in nicely. The timing is excellent to take us to the next level on offshore wind. That piece of legislation will be heard on Tuesday. Also, I would highlight the governor's bill, the Maryland Educator Shortage Act, a huge issue in our state of educator teacher shortage. This has to do with recruitment and retention. Look forward to hearing the presentation on Tuesday on that. And then finally, just on a personal level, I look forward next week to coming back to the Finance Committee to present the cannabis legalization bill, which will be next Thursday within the jurisdiction of Chair Griffith's committee, but I look forward to that towards the end of the week. So with that, Mr. President, I will yield back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one small thing I did want to highlight, and both of the committees have been out front on this. When we think about question one, this is a bit of the financial weeds of state government, but it's really important, and I think you'll see this theme repeating itself throughout the Senate on various bills. We're changing mandated appropriations to may instead of shall. Because of the new question one authority, the only way previously that we could appropriate the legislature's will on certain programs is to set a dollar amount and say the governor shall put in X dollar amount for X number of years moving forward or indefinitely. The challenge with that is that sometimes there are programs that cost a certain amount, or the thought of what it costs might be right for 1 year, but 3 years out, we still have a mandate where the dollars don't match the program. It could be less, it could be more, but there's less of an evaluation of what the needs may be in that mandate. Because we are doing may, and because now the legislature can appropriate independently in conjunction with the governor, we can now assess the quality of programs each and every year and appropriate the appropriate amount each time. This is what we said the reason for doing question one was. It's more fiscally responsible. It lowers the out-year debt or out-year commitments that have led to, at times, structural deficits. And so you'll see in a number of committees amendments, and the chairpersons will be mentioning on the floor that the shalls are being shifted to mays so that we can evaluate these programs and make sure that we are dedicating the right amount of public dollars each and every year as opposed to a blank amount moving forward. So just a small little detail, but I think it's really important. You'll see more and more of it over the next 2 weeks. So with that, let me open it up.
As far as minimum wage is concerned, your members, are they leaning toward or not to get rid of the automatic increase component of this bill?
Yeah, so what you're referring to is the indexing that the governor's proposal includes. Right now, the bill was heard yesterday. There were some very thoughtful questions and comments raised by the committee members. We haven't yet had a work session on the bill, but there were some concerns expressed by members of the committee and citizens who testified on the bill. So I expect the committee to work very thoughtfully through the bill and determine what provisions can be adopted and still balance the needs of not only our businesses, but our employees. One of the things that we considered is 95% of businesses in Maryland are small businesses. Small businesses employ 43.9% of all employees in the state, and we know that 42.5% of small businesses have racial minorities. 42% of racial minorities work at small businesses, and so we want to make sure that we're protecting both the state, the employees, and that we're looking out for our small businesses. So I know that the committee will be very thoughtful about that process. We think the governor made a very strong presentation. He was flanked by two of his very, very dynamic cabinet secretaries, and Secretary Anderson and Secretary of Labor Wu. They made a very strong case for the bill, so we've just got to work on a balanced approach to addressing minimum wage, knowing that we are coming back every year, as the president just stated, now with new budget authority.
President Ferguson, in regard to the budget, I believe in this committee or in this room last week mentioned the $2 billion in budget requests.
It's gotten larger.
Larger. Do you have a number like the larger number now?
It's probably closer to 2.4 at this point.
I mean, that's feeds into the question. So in that regard, I know that you also said that the last part of this session is going to be much busier than the first part. Is that tied at all? Because I believe Chair Griffith mentioned fiscal notes that could be kind of large. Is the delay on passing things onto the floor tied at all to inflation, the budget, large fiscal notes, requests, et cetera?
It's a great question. I would say it is a factor, but not a driver. So, we really try to take a comprehensive look. And so there are a number of really excellent programs, thoughtful, really great programs that cost a lot of money. And we have to be responsible with the taxpayers' dollars. And so, the key is to get a good sense of where we are as a state. We'll have a new revenue projections in the next week or so. That'll give us a better sense of what the economy is doing today and how that will impact our overall budget. We are expecting some sort of write-down. If the trends in Maryland model the trends nationally, it would not be surprising to see some of the exuberant heating of the economy pull back a little bit. And so we want to be very thoughtful about ensuring that we don't overcommit early. And so anything that has a big fiscal note is something that we have to take into account for future years. And it is also why you're seeing the Shao to May switch, that we can pass great ideas, and that when we have the funds to be able to pay for them, we can allocate those funds. If we don't have those revenues available, those programs will receive less. And so I think that's that's why we're here every year. It's our one constitutional duty. It's our most important duty. And so I think that's, the dollars are always going to drive a lot of our decision-making.
Speaking of budgeting, and last week I know you were asked about the Boost program and the funding. We saw, hundreds of kids out here yesterday making their case to you guys. Do you still believe that there is the opportunity to fully fund the program, and does that mean restoring the $2 million that the governor is proposing to cut?
Yeah, I do. I do believe that that's very possible. We are in a healthy budget positioning, even though we are, being very fiscally thoughtful. Funding education and investing in young people wherever they are is a value for the Senate of Maryland, and I think for the state overall. We believe that all young people deserve the opportunity to maximize their potential. And so this program, and this is a program that I personally have evolved on as I've seen families and young people really have incredible benefits. And in comparison to the $7.5 billion of state dollars, $8.5 billion if you include federal dollars, $8.5 billion to $10 million, it's a small differential. And I just think that having a portfolio of options in the state for making sure that everybody can maximize their potential is something that we can find a way to do.
Are you open to codifying Boost?
I think we'll see. It's going to be up to the Budget Committee and the Senate overall. There's conversations. I think we spent a lot of time on this differential. We spent a lot of energy on what is not a lot of money in comparison to our $62 billion budget. And so I think if there's a way that we can just come to some level of agreement and compromise across the board, I think that would be good for everyone.
Speaking of compromise, yesterday Republican lawmakers were in this room talking about their crime and public safety proposals. And you mentioned there's going to be discussions, forthcoming on that. Can you give a better sense of where leadership wants to see the Senate go in terms of protecting public safety?
In this room, I've said it over and over and over again. There is not one piece of legislation that will change the state of creating real safety. It is a comprehensive approach that's necessary. And it means collaboration, it means coordination, it means holding people accountable, and it means rehabilitation. And all of those components have to be a part of any solution. To just say we passed this one piece, this one bill, we changed one sentence, and we've done our job, that would be, I think Marylanders would be pretty frustrated if that's how we approached this work. We've got to take the full comprehensive approach. We do have to hold people accountable. When somebody breaks the law, there has to be swift and certain consequences. That is full stop. It is essential, one part of the story, but we also have to prevent it. And when people are held accountable, we have to rehabilitate them so that when they come back into society, they can be part of productive citizens. And so, we are really looking at this as a package. We've seen the increases that the Senate and House together have put into our law enforcement. We've also increased mental health access. We've tried to invest in education. All of these things matter. It is not just one piece of legislation.
Can you tell us where you see the gun legislation landing? There's a lot of pieces to that. I know it may be a little too early, you still need to work on it some more.
Yeah.
Where do you see it? What can you tell us in terms of details?
High level, yeah, I mean, high level, I would say the Judicial Proceedings Committee has done a lot of work on this. Kind of four components. One is the sensitive spaces, protecting sensitive spaces, churches, daycare, schools, making them places where it's not permissible to carry a concealed weapon, given all of the stress that presents. And actually, to this point, I do want to mention this because it's important. In my own district this week at Digital Harbor High School, there was students were let into a side door, and messages passed around the school, and the school was put down on lockdown as though that there was somebody coming into the school with a weapon. We are on edge. We are on edge. Turns out it was not. It was just individuals coming. It was students being let into a side door instead of having to go through and get a late pass. But the fact that an entire school was shut down, the entire community was scared. This is the world that we're living in, and it's not okay. And so we have to think about sensitive places differently. So that will be a major component. Having the right licensing and training for those who are receiving those concealed carry permits, making sure that the database that we're tracking when guns have been required to be turned over, particularly in domestic violence cases. This is Pam Beidel's bill that is really trying to make sure that that registry is maintained well, that when somebody has been ordered to relinquish their guns, they are permitted, or we are following up on that. And then finally, safe storage and making sure that we don't, now that we are seeing more guns around, that they are stored appropriately, because we know the vast majority of times that they're used in youth suicide or youth self-harm, it's because there was an unsecured gun available in somebody's home. And so we have to have a standard that tries to prevent this as much as possible. So those are the four components that we plan to move forward in the week ahead.
Going back to Pam's question about just the GOP's push yesterday with the public safety stuff, they really focused on the juvenile crime aspect of their package and the Violent Firearms Offender Act. I know the latter bill has passed the Senate the last 2 years. Do you see it do you have any plans to bring it to the floor this year to try it again, given it hasn't gained any traction in the House? And then the juvenile aspect of it, do you see there's any room for modifying the law that's currently on the books that's caused a lot of confusion or frustration?
Sure. So on the mandatory minimum bills, I don't think that there's an appetite for mandatory minimums. I think we've seen as a public policy, it is not a way that the state wants to move forward. We do have to have appropriate punishments and accountability. However, on the juvenile front, we did just this week pass an adjustment to the Juvenile Reform Act that requires officers to submit to the Department of Juvenile Services petitions for services. And this is key, because if we have a 10, 11, or 12-year-old child who is committing an act, we need to get services to make sure that we can divert future behavior. We know something's not going well. And we also know in the juvenile system, these young kids, if we don't intervene now, we're gonna have a serious problem. And so this will be a required petition to the Department of Juvenile Services, whereas right now it was permissive. And so that bill just passed the Senate unanimously this week.
To build off of Mackenzie's question, could you see a potential appetite in the Senate to push for the bill that's supported by Ivan Bates, which increases the maximum, but I don't believe has a minimum.
Right, it matches the under 18-year-olds to older adults. Look, this personally is a bill that I support. I know that there are conversations happening about what might be feasible. I think that matching penalties between different age groups makes sense, and so it's certainly on the table for discussion this year. But one piece of legislation will not solve and create real safety. We have got to be collaborative. We have to have a real plan, and the executive agencies at every level of government have to execute every day. That is the key.
Mr. Chair, as far as wind energy is concerned, are there any whispers that some of the turbine companies may not be financially stable? There was a Wall Street Journal report maybe last month that Ørsted, O-R-S-T-E-D, was facing some financial difficulties. Ørsted would be building mostly off the coast of Delaware. I know U.S. Wind wants to build off the coast of Ocean City, but has that come up in any conversations about company stability?
I mean, we're going to have, again, a hearing on Tuesday. Some of those issues should come up. I should say, just broadly speaking from a national perspective, the fact that the United States Congress went so big in the Inflation Reduction Act it's not just the 30% investment tax credit to maybe help these developers get projects online, but there's also provisions dealing with leasing more area that will be available now under the federal provisions. And so I think the Congress, looking more holistically, has said this is a great job creator. It's great, again, for the future of our climate change goals. It's good on a lot of fronts. I was reminding Senate President last year, he had a press conference with the whole group up U.S. Wind, and that's already reaping benefits for our state in terms of economics. But there are other players. It's not just U.S. Wind and Ørsted. One of the reasons back in 2019, Clean Energy Jobs Act, we went bigger, and actually you'll see in the proposal on Tuesday, we're even going to go bigger yet. I think there are other players, and if somebody has not financially got the wherewithal to develop, even with 30% investment tax credit dollars from the feds over the next 10 years, I think there will be other players coming into the space. So there are more than two players, as I guess I would say, but I think this is a significant issue, and again, Congress is putting money behind it. So.
Got time for two more, guys.
I just want to
Can
clarify.
I made this, one final thing, just more broadly on solar energy and all the other, again, I think I said this the last time, there are $370 billion totally in the clean energy, in the Inflation Reduction Act, specifically for clean energy projects. And it's the states that can put on the ground policies, because a lot of the money is competitive. It's not just formula driven. And I think we're putting some things in place this session that I think position ourselves to be, we're one of the states leading in clean energy, send those dollars to us. If Virginia doesn't want to do some things, like for example, there are incentives about projects that have prevailing wage will get more, that's one of the qualifications. The Treasury Department came out with guidance. We have a piece of legislation on the floor, actually passed yesterday, I believe, that ties clean energy projects in the solar space to prevailing wage. So we're doing some things that aren't happening in other states, and I think we can tap that big federal largesse in ways that a lot of our neighbors cannot. So that's more big picture.
Yeah, let me just add one last thing on this too. I think the chairman said it exactly right. This is a race for the future. Wind and solar are coming. We know that they are coming. And so the states that can be the most prepared to promote those jobs will be the ones that win the future. And so I think that's what Maryland is really poised to do.
I just want to clarify, the Violent Firearms Offender Act, you said that there isn't an appetite for mandatory minimums. This bill seeks to raise the maximum penalty, still giving judges discretion.
That's correct.
There is no mandatory minimum.
No mandatory minimum in that.
So is there appetite for that bill?
I think it's in consideration, something that I support. I think we're having conversations across both chambers about what might be feasible. But again, that one piece of legislation, even if we do move it forward and it does pass and the governor signs it, there's a lot more work that has to go to make sure that we have real safe communities. And so it's one little small tool in what is a much bigger picture.
President Ferguson, the Senate is considering the confirmation of Acting Superintendent Roland Butler for the Maryland State Police. That's an agency with a lot of problems, and the Baltimore Banner reported just this morning about another problem. The medical director resigned because he's under investigation by the Board of Physicians for his involvement in what's been described as a sham erectile dysfunction company. That's on top of everything else at that agency. I don't know if you've had a chance to meet with him yet and what your thoughts are. And given so much, should the legislature take some sort of larger role in looking at that agency in addition to the superintendent?
So I've not heard that most recent news, so I don't have anything to comment on. I haven't had a chance to ask about that one. I did have a meeting with Lieutenant Colonel and asked him about some of the challenges that the department has faced. I think that he gave satisfactory answers. I do think that there will be an ongoing role for the legislature to ensure that the department is as effective as possible. The collection of incidents that have come up over the short amount of time in the last few years indicates that there is probably a broader look that needs to be done. And so whomever the superintendent is, assuming Lieutenant Colonel moves forward through the confirmation process, we look forward to working very closely to make sure that that agency is functioning on all cylinders. The challenges with some of the quota systems, some of the concerns about racial animus in some of the barracks, all of these have to be investigated fully, and it's part of the legislature's job as oversight to make sure that it's done well.
How much confidence do you have in the Lieutenant Colonel to be the next superintendent?
I have confidence after our conversation.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thanks, guys.
Thank you all. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.